Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, and welcome to the Bay Area Council's Bay Area Impact webinar series, where we explore the region's most important issues with influential business and civic leaders. My name is Melinda Yee Franklin. I'm Managing Director of Corporate and Government Affairs for the Western Region for United Airlines, and also the Bay Area Council's co-chair for Government Relations and the chairman of the board of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I know there's over 100 people on this call, so we really appreciate your participation. Before we start, I want to encourage anyone watching to submit questions. You may use the Q&A portion of the webinar located down below. Please use that feature at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our very best to get to most of your questions, probably not all of them, but we do promise we will answer as many as we can here and then the follow-ups online as well. Please feel free to submit any questions beginning now, anytime. So this week, this is incredibly timely, our topic today. All eyes are on Washington, where both houses of Congress have returned to session to work on the next round of federal stimulus in response to the coronavirus pandemic, which has surged in recent weeks, including in California, and sadly has dashed plans for reopening the economy. It's bad news for roughly 5 million Californians who have lost their jobs and thousands of business owners who have had to close their doors. In response to the CARES Act, which was signed in March and included many benefits that will expire this month, the House has passed the $3 trillion HEROES Act. And while there's been disagreement between the White House and Republicans in the Senate on what should be included in their version of a relief package, these negotiations are ongoing. In addition, the White House has a range of multi-industry regulatory policies in the pipeline planned for the next 6 months. So what can we expect from Washington in the coming days and weeks as it pertains to renewed federal stimulus as well as executive branch actions? We're honored today to have with us very influential insiders who have taken time out of their busy schedules to give us insight on what's happening in DC. First, I'd like to welcome my friend, longtime friend, Leslie Katz, partner of Clark Hill's Government and Regulatory Affairs Practice Group. Leslie, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Melinda. I'm honored to introduce Dan Bernal, Chief of Staff in San Francisco for Congresswoman and Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. He has dedicated his career to public service, having served in the White House under President Bill Clinton and as a presidential appointee at the U.S. Department of Education. Dan currently serves as president of the San Francisco Health Commission, the largest city and county department with a $2.4 billion annual budget and more than 8,000 employees. Previously, Dan served as the board president of the AIDS Emergency Fund and spearheaded the creation of the Breast Cancer Emergency Fund. We're so pleased to have you join us today, and during what I'm sure is an especially busy time. Dan, could you please give us an overview of where things are right now with the House's HEROES Act, as well as what you see coming through the pipeline and climate change policies, and of course, anything else you think might be of interest to council members. Dan, thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be here with the Bay Area Council and all of you. Leslie and Melinda, thank you for bringing us all together. And Leslie, thank you for that kind introduction. I always like to try and start these things by just kind of asking everybody how they're doing. I hope you're doing okay. These are very challenging times, unprecedented times that I don't think any of us anticipated facing now. And so please accept my best wishes and hope for self-care for you as we're navigating these difficult times. As Leslie had mentioned, the House has passed the HEROES Act. It's been now 9 weeks since the House of Representatives passed the HERO Act, but the Republicans have blocked this critical coronavirus relief in the Senate, and I know that the Speaker and also Senator Schumer are calling on Leader McConnell to bring up this legislation immediately for a vote. I know you all know where we are as a country, but just as a quick overview, last week, the UI claims. This week we just had 1.4 million people file for unemployment. The unemployment insurance and eviction moratoriums expired last week, so those need to be renewed and certainly supplemented immediately. There have been nearly 1.5 million layoffs in state and local governments, which adds to so many of the massive job losses that have occurred. Since the House passed the HEROES Act again 9 weeks ago, 2.5 million more Americans have become infected with the coronavirus, bringing the total today to more than 3.9 million, and 55,000 more people have died since that time, bringing our total to more than 140,000. So the time to act is not now, it is long past overdue. So just to give a quick overview of what's in the HEROES Act for those who need a refresher or might not know, the HEROES Act certainly honors our heroes by providing nearly $1 trillion to state and local and territorial and tribal governments who desperately need the funds to pay for vital services like first responders, healthcare workers, teachers, and others who keep us safe, who are currently in danger of losing their jobs. I've crunched some of the numbers where you can find some of this information too on speaker.gov/HEROES Act. But if you look at the allocations to the Bay Area counties that would come in the HEROES Act over 2 years, you see a total of more than nearly $4.4 billion coming to Bay Area, to jurisdictions within Bay Area counties. Just quickly, that is over 2 years again, more than $956 million to Alameda, $674 million to Contra Costa, $145 million to Marin, $77 million to Napa, more than $278 million to Sonoma, more than $495 million to San Francisco, $431 million to San Mateo, Santa Clara more than $1 billion, and Solano about more than $251 million. So this is critical assistance that states and localities need. California, over the course of those 2 years altogether, would receive more than $48 billion, 21.5 in the first year and 26.5 in the second year. That's 2020 and 2021. If you look at what's happening in both the San Francisco, where certainly the Speaker's District is, and in California, these allocations would go very far and come close to, if not entirely, eliminate some of the shortfalls that jurisdictions are seeing because of a loss of revenue and increased demand for services related to the pandemic. In addition to that, there's another $75 billion for coronavirus testing and contact tracing and isolation measures across the country. More direct payments. There'd be a second round of direct economic impact payments of $1,200 per family member and up to $6,000 per household. The new employer retention tax credit would be enhanced as well. That encourages employers to keep workers on the payroll. It would basically expand the period of time during which you could apply this. Worker safety, it requires OSHA to put in place some very strong enforceable standards for workplace safety, to develop and implement infection control plans based on CDC expertise. Also supports small businesses and nonprofits. It supports the PPP program, the Payroll Protection Program, to ensure that it reaches underserved communities and nonprofits and all sizes and types of small businesses. Another $10 billion for emergency grants to the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program as well. The HEROES Act also preserves healthcare coverage by protecting Americans from losing their employer-provided health insurance with COBRA subsidies. Unemployment benefits would be extended at $600 again weekly through next January. There's housing assistance, $175 billion in new supports to assist renters and homeowners to make their monthly rent and mortgage payments. Addresses hunger and food security with a 15% increase in the maximum SNAP benefit, and includes new resources to ensure safety in our elections and accurate census, and preserving the Postal Service, which you all know is going to be critical in administering our elections coming up this November. when the speaker talks about the HEROES Act, she's been talking about it in terms of justice, in terms of health justice, economic justice for employees and others. Another important development that's happened in the last few weeks is the House Democrats have released their Solve the Climate Crisis report. It has a number of measures in it that I know Rolling Stone magazine has called some of the most significant climate proposals that have been put forward in our history. There's an ambitious emissions goal, net zero by 2050 and net negative thereafter. Through a number of different measures. There is significant investment in infrastructure, building a cleaner and more resilient energy sector and transportation sectors, building and upgrading homes and businesses to maximize energy efficiency. Is among some of the provisions. The second pillar, of course, is to drive innovation and development of clean energy and decarbonization technologies, and to transform industry and manufacturing of clean energy and zero emission technologies. There are a number of provisions that are in there that are probably too numerous to go over now in the amount of time that we have. The other piece that I would like to touch on quickly is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We've all been, I think, deeply impacted by the killing of George Floyd, and also, I think, inspired by the way that our communities have come together to demonstrate and other things. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Bill is really a bold and unprecedented reform to curb police brutality and racial profiling and eliminate qualified immunity. It's really designed to transform the culture of policing to address systemic racism and help save lives, and it holds police accountable and increases transparency. Very specifically, that bill bans chokeholds, it bans no-knock warrants in drug cases, it bans racial and religious and discriminatory profiling, again, eliminates qualified immunity doctrine that's a barrier to hold police officers accountable for wrongful conduct, and it establishes a national police misconduct registry to improve transparency across jurisdictions. It requires a number of different pieces of data collection, including mandatory body cameras, establishes new national standards for policing, as we discussed, and it also provides no new funding for policing, but does invest in public safety by providing more resources to community-based organizations to help really reimagine what policing means in their communities. So that, in a nutshell, is what is happening right now, and the Congress isn't being considered. Again, the Senate really needs to act specifically on the HEROES Act and the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. I would like to just take a few seconds to take a look back, again, using San Francisco as an example of the assistance that the Paycheck Protection Program has offered. In San Francisco, more than 20,000 applications had been approved, and it's estimated by the SBA that approximately 195,990 jobs were retained because of the assistance that small businesses and other employers were able to receive through the Paycheck Protection Program. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that you have, and thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Dan, and I know your time today is limited. So I'd like to ask you, what do you see are the areas where there's been the most disagreement between Democrat and Republicans, and also between Republicans and the White House for inclusion in the stimulus package? And where do you think they can find middle ground? And what is the time frame for getting this all resolved?
Well, the time frame was 6 weeks ago, or 9 weeks ago, honestly, for getting this resolved. I think, you know, and I'll leave this to some of my some of the other folks to talk about what might be going on between the Republicans in the Senate and the White House. But I think really just as a basic principle, everything that the Democrats in the House have put forward has been very science-based. It has been, you know, of course, you saw very strong resistance from the administration and Senate Democrats early on in providing any assistance at all to state and local governments, whereas the Democrats have provided $1 trillion in the House passed bill. I believe it was Leader McConnell who had said that states and localities should file bankruptcy if they found themselves in such dire financial straits. The speaker's emphasis has always been on investing in testing, and contact tracing. That's a place where the Senate really needs to step up in their legislation. So I would, and just the overall level of investment, I think, in terms of funding is the biggest area of disagreement. Melinda.
Dan, can you take one more question, please?
I can, yeah.
Okay, I want to make him be respectful of your time.
Oh, thanks.
So this is from Jeff Album, who's with Delta Dental. Where do you put the odds of the next stimulus package containing an increase to the FMAP to assist states with their increased Medicaid enrollment?
I honestly would have to get back to you on that. I'll check in with our DC staff to see where this might be in the Senate. As you know, negotiations are ongoing, but I don't have that right now.
Okay. And can I just ask you one more question? Just
of course, Melinda. Hi.
Yeah, because this is top of mind for a lot of us in the Bay Area, the homelessness issue and housing, affordable housing. Can you give us your thoughts on that as well, please?
Well, of course, seeing our unhoused neighbors in San Francisco, I think, is the challenge to the conscience of all of us, and it brings it into much sharper focus here in San Francisco as we are and elsewhere as we're facing this pandemic. I think we are learning very quickly that we need to provide housing and shelter to people who are within vulnerable populations. I know from the Health Commission perspective, this San Francisco has prioritized how we're able to put people into the, I believe now more than 2,500 hotel units we've been able to procure. Our first priorities were, of course, frontline healthcare workers who were facing exposure every day and were concerned about bringing home potential exposure to their families, then to people who are in vulnerable populations, which, as you know, are people at age 60 and over who had pre-existing conditions. We've been able to house a very large number of them, and the vast majority of them are homeless. But I think that some of what's been done has been controversial. You've seen, but also very effective. For example, the safe sleeping sites in San Francisco. The one in particular that had been over between the Asian Art Museum and the public library had succeeded in housing, I believe, about 50% of the people who had gone there, either through the Homeward Bound program that helps people connect with family members or relatives that they had lost contact with, or getting them into permanent and supportive housing. So, it's certainly been a very, very large concern in San Francisco, has been brought into even greater focus through our experience in dealing with the pandemic. And I know that the CARES Act did provide significant resources for addressing homelessness, including a large amount for San Francisco, and I'd have to get you that number. But also the provisions in the HEROES Act that help prevent people from losing their homes by either extending moratoriums or providing assistance for mortgage or rental assistance are really critical. But it's a very challenging issue to tackle, and it certainly did not begin with this pandemic, and it will not end either. But I know that a lot of good work is being done.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you for joining us today. We truly appreciate your time, and Speaker Pelosi is certainly a hero to many of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'll bring your regards to the other Bay Area district directors that I'm about to join now, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you. I'd also like to welcome Kevin Kelly, the leader of Clark Hill's Government and Regulatory Affairs Group, as well as Anthony Campo, the Director of Government Regulation and Counsel in the Government and Regulatory Affairs Group in the DC and Detroit offices of Clark Hill. They will update you on other important legislative and regulatory issues in the program. They both have a wealth of experience in a wide range of legal and policy issues. Welcome to you both, Anthony and Kevin. And Kevin, first, could you please give us a brief overview from the legislative side? What is the most recent update as Congress has been negotiating their proposals for the next round of federal stimulus?
Well, thank you, Melinda, and thank you for all of you for joining us this afternoon. We are in the throes of the Congress is in the throes of trying to address the COVID crisis, as obviously everyone knows. It's quite challenging right now, right? The House passed the HEROES Act, which was large and comprehensive in its approach and very expensive, with an additional $3 trillion. The Senate Republicans have been, as Dan pointed out, their strategy has been to delay and kind of force everything and back the package up to the August recess, so as to have a very compressed, tight negotiating window with, the liability protections for businesses and other health providers, schools, and so forth as their main topic and emphasis, and then other things that will come through. So the Republicans threw out a draft last night around midnight of an itemized list. It was not text, so it doesn't have a lot of the nuances and the details there. And there was supposed to be a rollout of the bill language and the package today, but Senator McConnell has apparently delayed that. And it sounds like from all the tea leaves today, because of the lack of consensus inside of both the Republican caucus and then between the White House and the Senate Republicans, that's probably going to be delayed until next week. And next week, of course, is complicated by the likely funeral and memorial for Congressman Lewis, who sadly passed away, as all of you know, at the end of last week. Because of that, I don't see them really getting down to brass tacks as far as negotiating that package, and we can talk more about this in the Q&A, until probably the end of next week. I mean, there will be some discussions, as there were beginning at this week, and there was discussion yesterday at the Republican caucus. But unfortunately, I think the lack of an opening bargaining position for the Republicans has created a vacuum as such for them, and we won't get closure on this probably until sometime in early August. And I think it'll be very tough. The negotiations, we'll talk more about this, but it'll be very tough. And Congress has a lot of other things on their plate to finish before the end of the year. The House is in the middle of moving the 12 appropriations bills that contain all the discretionary spending, much of it obviously very relevant to institutions and entities in the Bay Area. And that will, they're moving all of those through so that they can complete action on the House side, at least, through sometime before they adjourn for the August recess, likely sometime towards the end of next week or early the following week. They'll complete action on those. In all likelihood, though, there will not be any final disposition of the budget and the appropriations process until after the election. So there will be likely a continuing resolution that extends everything, the current footprint of federal spending, until sometime after the election, probably around Thanksgiving. And then based upon the election results, they'll come back and either finish or kick the can into the 117th Congress and the swearing in of either President Trump in a reelected second term or Vice President Biden. But besides those things, and the spending as always seems to dominate, they have to finish the defense authorization bill. Both houses are, the House has passed their version, and the Senate is likely to complete action on their bill today. Again, until they settle off on the spending issues, it's unlikely that they'll be able to finish action on those. There are some policy differences. The president has threatened a veto of any form of the defense bill that forces the removal of Confederate monuments. So you see all of these parallel social issues brought in, obviously, by the George Floyd situation and the pressing need for racial justice and racial equality, that there is these issues which might not normally be central to these bigger policy debates are being brought in and will delay final action on those pieces of legislation. But besides that, people sometimes don't realize there are 6 or 7 other major pieces of legislation of ongoing activity that need to be addressed between now and the end of the year. FISA, which is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that has to be extended at some point this year. the highway bill, which funds all of the surface transportation and transit projects that are under capital development in the country, including in California, that expires at the end of September. There is a national flood insurance program, which also expires at the end of September, which affects millions of property owners throughout the United States. Besides that, child care and welfare laws, actually the current authorizations for them, those actually expire right after Thanksgiving. So they'll have to be tackled in some way, shape, or form. And then there are a range, maybe 7 or 10 various health programs that, frankly, their authorities also lapse at the end of September. So even if Congress comes back in a lame duck session, they'll have to tackle some of these issues as well. There's also issues about sanctions towards Russia, towards the Chinese, and towards Venezuela that may or may not face some action here before the end of the year. And of course, then there still remains the whole process of oversight of the Recovery Act spending, the COVID relief funding, where Congress has an oversight role that no doubt will get a great deal of attention. So between now and the election, those are the panoply of things that they have to do. So it's very action-packed, even though the Congress has very few days left between now and the election, when both the House and the Senate will be in session.
Wow, really, really full plate. I don't know if you know, but I lived in Washington for 10 years in the Clinton administration, and I don't remember that plate being as full. It's pretty incredible what needs to be done in a short amount of time. So Anthony, over to you. What updates and insights about the stimulus debate in Washington can you provide from your perspective?
Thank you, Melinda. Thanks to the Bay Area Council and members for having us today. We're excited to be here. Just for a little, I wanted to today give you a little context about this sort of regulatory moment that we're in, give you a little bit of a roadmap of what I think is coming over the next 6 months, both for implementing the packages and more broadly for regulatory actions that I see in the pipeline, and then talk about the tools that I think are likely to be used, the regulatory tools, which are a little bit different. Just for some perspective, so I just recently left the administration. I was serving as the Chief of Staff and Counsel of the White House Regulatory and Information Policy Office, which coordinates the regulatory and information policy of the executive branch for all the agencies. And so I have a pretty good cross-cutting view of kind of what's in the pipeline. I think just overall, at the beginning of the administration, we had a year of really trying to go out low-hanging fruit and clearing out the pipeline of rules that were there from the last administration. And the second and third years were really spent proposing a lot of big new regulatory reforms at most agencies. And then sort of the second half of that third year and the fourth year here are all about finalizing those regulatory reforms. So I think we're really going to see a big push now, because the regulatory process is so long that to actually complete a lot of the big deregulatory work, it takes 2-3 years. And we're just now into that point where they're starting to finalize some of the biggest actions. So I think you're going to see a lot of that over the next 6 months. I do think it's worth also noting that the Congressional Review Act deadline, this is the statute that allows Congress to say they don't want a rule, they don't agree with it, and they send it back to the president to get rid of it. President Trump and this Congress used it extensively at the beginning of the administration. That timeline for the CRA, most people in town think was mid-May of this year. So all these big deregulatory actions that we're finalizing now may be subject to Congressional Review Act in the new Congress, is worth noting. And if the president doesn't win re-election, the possibility of being overturned. So it's something to be aware of. The president signed an executive order calling for a number of regulatory reforms to basically go back and look at all the actions that have been taken to respond to COVID-19, to implement CARES Act and others, to see which of those actions were ones that we want to extend out further, and which are ones to let sort of go by the wayside. So there's a huge effort underway across the government now. In most federal agencies, most of them had some role in modifying rules to allow the markets to function, to allow things like masks and other PPE to get to the market quickly. A lot of modifications that were made that are being reviewed carefully now. And we may see long-term fixes or long-term streamlining of a lot of those rules. Right now, all the deregulatory actions that have been taken in response to COVID-19 over the past several months have pretty much been tied to the pandemic. And basically, once the pandemic is over, or the official emergency declaration ends, those rules kind of snap back. And so the effort now is thinking about making them permanent. If that happens, it would, I think, have a pretty big impact on a lot of sectors that, you know, are providing the kind of PPE and that sort of thing that was impacted very directly. I think also, just for what it's worth, there's a publication that my old office issues twice a year. It's a snapshot of all of the rules in the pipeline at federal agencies. It lets you know what's coming. When we started in the administration, there were just over 3,000 there. Our first agenda, we pulled off about 1,000 rules. We've now added a lot of those back. There are 2,700 rules in the pipeline. Just to give you a sense, here in the second half of the fourth year, there's still, you know, almost 3,000 rules. That this agenda that just came out about a month ago is the biggest agenda to date in the Trump administration. So there's a lot of activity underway. There are almost 150 rules right now at the White House for review, 1,000 forms. So there's just a tremendous amount of regulatory activity. I think there's a sense that maybe, you know, people leave and everything is going to slow down. And I think it's actually the opposite. I think you're going to see a big ramp up into the end of the fourth year here. There are also a number of other executive order driven projects that are underway across the government that were sort of set on the side for a few months as everybody was focused on COVID-19. A lot of those activities are being picked back up. And so, for example, there's a major initiative that many of you probably know about, where the agencies all had to identify all of the guidance documents that they've issued and put them in a central place and make decisions as to each one, whether they think that they should stay in place or not. This is a really important part of policy, the policy process in the executive branch. And it's a big change that they all have to be located in one place, make it a little more accessible for the public to understand which rules and guidances they are subject to. That activity is very much underway and is going to be, I think, completed relatively soon. There's an executive order that required agencies to identify the ways, it basically set out a policy for how we're going to regulate artificial intelligence, some principles for that, and called on agencies to take a number of actions. I think that's going to get picked back up, and you'll see implementation of that. So some further guidance from the agencies on how they're thinking of regulating AI. Similar with privacy, I think you'll see more action on that from the agencies. These are obviously areas where you haven't seen Congress pass a bill, but we're in a place where the executive branch has said, you know, we want to take the steps that we can to have voluntary standards, identify what authorities we do have, and use them in a way that I think, as the administration sees it, as sort of liberty maximizing. So all that activity, I think, is getting picked back up, and you'll see a lot of those start to be completed over the next 6 months. And then finally, just the tools that are being used right now. I think this is important. Normally, the regulatory process is an agency says, here is what we would like to do in a particular area of policy. It's a proposal. Public, please tell us what you think. They review comments and they finalize the rule. In this COVID world, that's not been the case, as you all know. Basically, the agencies have said, here is our final rule. effective immediately. Please tell us if we got something wrong and we'll try to fix it. And so that's why you're seeing lots of iterating on rules and guidances recently, lots of basically interim final guidances and interim final rules. I think that's been a great opportunity for folks to have an impact on the rules, not in the first wave, but sometimes in the second and third wave of the policies. And I think you're going to see a lot more iterating on all of those IFRs over the next 6 months. And so it's an opportunity. They mean it when they say, please tell us if we got something wrong or if we're not accounting for all of the ways this impacts your business. So I think, that's something to be aware of. And the same thing with the economic recovery COVID-19 executive order. They're basically looking for they're not looking at any action. They're not just looking at any actions that they took in response to COVID-19, but also ones that they should have taken on executive branch policy rules and guidances. And if they didn't take them, they want to know about it. So those are some things to be aware of as you kind of engage going forward. So I'll leave it there, Melinda.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anthony. Really good food for thought. And I'm going to kick off the round of questions with a question to you first. I want to remind our participants, please, who are on the phone, our audience, please submit questions in Q&A because we want to hear from you. So, Anthony, how do you see the White House's role in their pandemic response playing out or changing going forward? There has been some evolution there, and being that you're an insider, I want to get your perspective on that.
Well, I think that, my particular world is the regulatory world, right? I think that's an area that a lot of folks identified early on as needing key reforms quickly. Some people think of regulatory reform or deregulation as a conservative or a Republican thing. But I think that, in the moment of in the immediate beginning of the COVID-19 experience, it was very clear that if we were going to get PPE to the market, for example, if we were going to get tests to market, we needed regulatory reform, not because we needed to slash and burn, but because we needed to get product out. We need to protect the public. And so that's an area where I think there's a lot of agreement early and sort of consistently, and really trying to lean in and get that right. Some of the public facing things that you see, they sort of go, there's sometimes a bit of a gap between what you see with the public fighting and kind of then behind the scenes of people who sort of have their heads down and are just marching forward, implementing policies. So, the fact that we have the PPE, for example, now largely is, there were almost 700 deregulatory actions that were taken, over the last few months. I mean, that's an extraordinary amount of regulatory activity that, by and large gets almost no attention, and that's fine. But those are concrete actions that each one took, dozens and dozens of people, many, many hours to write and coordinate and make happen. And so there's just, I would just say there's a lot of behind the scenes that is sort of head down, serious work that just needs to be done, a lot of blocking and tackling, and it's very good that it's happening. And I think it's going to continue to happen in a serious way. So,
Thank you. Kevin, I'm going to flip over a question to you, sir. What items in the stimulus discussions are legislators actually in agreement with each other that should be included in the next round of stimulus? I asked a similar question to Dan, but I wanted to get your perspective as well.
Sure. I think there'll be some tax subsidies that they've agreed on. Clearly, the employer retention tax credit, there actually is probably some augmentation they'll do there. There'll be some additional relief for hospitals. So the broad categories of where there will be some help, right? There'll be some direct payments to individuals. There'll be some adjustment to unemployment. All of these things are a matter of degree, and pretty dramatic degree for that matter. I mean, because, and there will be more PPP, how much and what it will be targeted towards. Will it have, set asides for smaller businesses or for minority owned businesses, as some have talked about? There are very different ideas on this that will be hashed out over the next couple of weeks. But on the tax side, on all these categories, there'll be there's some agreement, but the differences are so wide that you can say, well, they at least are talking about the same areas of interest, but getting to a compromise that actually everyone can live with, and you can get a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate and then a majority in the House. We're a long way from that at this point, unfortunately, Melinda.
Yeah, sadly, just got to keep going on. So we had a question. I know you mentioned AI, Kevin. Where should we send our comments on regulations related to AI and privacy? Can that be something to you, or how can we?
Yeah, both of us, I think, both Anthony and myself, I think, be happy to, because there are different areas there. I don't think Congress is going to legislate anything right now. But I think, and again, as we've talked about in getting ready for this session, I think besides the immediate things that Anthony identified and we've identified as being active this year, I think there's a potential for a lot of activity in these areas in the new Congress. And I think that's where, as you prepare, the next 6 months are almost as important for what comes after January 1st as the critical things that need to occur now to address the economic and public health crises that the country's facing.
Okay, and we have another question from the audience. Can you share anything about OIRA's role in reviewing tax regulations?
Why,
No,
yes,
that's Anthony's, please.
I'd be very happy to do that. I would just say maybe first, Melinda, on artificial intelligence. So the president issued an executive order on this, and basically directing a number of White House components and agencies to take specific actions. One of the agencies he called on to take action was my old office. We helped to write basically principles for other agencies, for all the executive branch, on how to use their existing statutory authorities to regulate AI in a responsible way, a way that facilitates AI development and does so responsibly. And so that is a guidance document to the agencies from OIRA that's out there that people can comment on. We'd love to see that and help. Feel free to let us know. And then the individual agencies will all be taking follow-on actions from that. So it's all the timeline sort of slid back because of COVID. But I expect, in particular, because the European Union has a deadline coming early in 2021, I expect the U.S. government to not want to be left behind. As many of you know, I mean, I think there's a sort of a sense that the federal government is, behind Europe on GDPR and California and on privacy, and I think they don't want to be in the same place on artificial intelligence. And so I think you're going to see activity there. With respect to tax rules, I think this is a really important development. So my old office was set up initially to review the order setting it up from President Clinton. Basically sets it up to review rules of all agencies, and then there was a follow-on agreement that exempted the Treasury Department and the IRS from that review process and the various requirements associated with it, including cost-benefit analysis. The president issued an executive order basically calling for a review of that exemption, whether it still made sense. There was an extensive series of negotiations. I was chief of staff at the time in that office, and so I spent a lot of time on this issue. I think it's really important. And we came to an agreement with the department to basically review the majority of those rules. They go through the process now. They include cost-benefit analysis. And this is important for the same reason it's important that all rules go through OIRA. It helps the federal government to be better coordinated. A lot of times agencies have overlapping jurisdiction, and if they don't talk, and if their rules, what happens is a rule comes to our office and we bring together all the stakeholders from across the executive branch to make sure that everything is going to work when that goes out. So we now have that conversation on Treasury rules. And also Treasury now has a lot more role to play in what are non-traditional sort of tax areas of policymaking. And so as they wade more in, because Congress has directed them, not necessarily because they voluntarily wish to do this, but Congress has given them a lot of authority in other areas of policy, sort of beyond what we should typically think of as tax policy. And so for that and a number of other reasons, it makes a lot of sense to have it there. So I'm happy to answer any other sort of specific questions about it or talk offline with folks about it. I think it's a really important development. It hasn't slowed down the release of rules. I think it's generally made them more, it's been useful. The process change also comports with the emerging view in the courts and the academy on what needed to happen. So I think it was a very sound reform that I think is going to stand the test of time.
So just related to that, if someone wants to make a public comment relating to that or any related issues, how do they do that? Is there a public comment website? Is there what's the process for someone to weigh in on these issues?
Yeah, so the normal process is, at the Federal Register, you can always submit a comment on a proposed rule. My old office, OIRA, also holds meetings when rules are there under review. So, what you often have is maybe you have an RFI at the beginning of a regulatory process where the agency outlines some initial brushstrokes about what it's thinking. You can submit a comment on that. Then they issue a proposal. You can submit a comment on that. Then they come out with a final rule. At pretty much every stage of that process, those rules go to OIRA. So the RFIs, the proposals, and the final rules. You can have a conversation with the team there, and that's the team that basically, that's the White House career staffer who manages the process, and they bring together the stakeholders from across the government, the drafters and the participants from sister organizations that have an equity in the policy to have discussions.
So what does OIRA stand for one more time? We were asked that question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
no,
it's the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs.
Okay, got it.
It's little known outside of Washington and even in Washington. The Washington Post refers to it as the most powerful office you've never heard of. It's the bureaucratic, largely career office within the White House that manages privacy policy, statistical policy, data policy, and all rules, forms, and significant guidances for the whole government. So. Okay,
so I don't know if this is a similar place that has this info, but is there a central place for the list of FDA EUA items that are being reviewed currently for being in discussions of being permanent rules moving forward?
I guess, is that a question about applications on EUAs or just the existing stock of EUAs? There is an FDA landing page for the current EUAs and those that are approved, but I'm not aware of any landing page where you can see the sort of backlog of who has submitted applications and where they are in the queue. I haven't seen anything like that, but.
In fact, Melinda, they issued guidance at the beginning of April. The FDA did to the Congress that said they would, out of an abundance of caution and to show no impropriety, they would not grant status reports on any applications that have been submitted. And it's leading to a lot of tension now, especially with the demands in testing that are out there. And there's a whole series of other additional tests that are waiting to be approved to add capacity, given that the results are so delayed now. And so it's quite controversial. I'm sure it'll be reviewed, this whole process, after the fact, after we get through the worst of it.
So Kevin, let me pivot on another subject. Schools. As many local governments and families are deciding whether and how to safely reopen in the fall, what can we expect at the federal level for guidance on that?
Well, that's a good question. There's obviously a big disagreement as to what should happen. The Republican plan that was unveiled last night effectively fenced off about half of the money for K. There's about 70 billion for 105 billion in the Republican plan for this is the Senate Republican plan for schools. It's less than what's in the HEROES Act. 70 billion of that is set aside for K to 12, and half of that, I think roughly, is for schools that will reopen. And so they're trying to condition the traditional Title I IDEA funding that's for special needs, and almost every school, all school districts in the United States get those funds, and those are the large portion of the federal funds. And they're roughly 8 to 10% of most school district budgets are federally sponsored. But there is going to be a huge fight over this. There's obviously a large public debate on this right now as to whether or not, as my old boss, Senator Mikulski, would say, by the way, she went to the same high school as the speaker in Baltimore. And I would encourage all of you, as you think about what's going to happen on this COVID package, remember that Speaker Pelosi, her heritage is Nancy D'Alessandro from East Baltimore, and she's proven to be a fairly effective negotiator coming out of that background. But the question is whether the government closest to the people will be allowed to govern best, versus having a heavy hand from Washington on the premise that we've got to get all schools reopened regardless of the potential public health consequences. And there are no easy answers here on this, and I think it remains to be seen what will happen. I find it hard to believe that the House would support some kind of heavy-handed mandate that would compel school districts to go back in person. That it will be largely, I think, in most places, a hybrid process that will evolve over time based upon the consequences and the public health circumstances on the ground, the age of the teachers, and the risks that are involved there too. And I think that's there is no set answer at this point, but I have a hard time. I have a hard time seeing Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer agreeing to any package that demands or requires people to put children back into classrooms over the objections of the local school board.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. So Anthony, what about extended benefits for businesses? Many employers were either unable to secure loans or have yet to receive them after applying. Do you expect federal loans like PPP will continue? And do you think the White House will be successful in getting a payroll tax included in the stimulus package?
I do expect the loans to continue. I think there's an effort to sort of claw back some money through various means, and of the money that's already gone out. And I expect that once that's all fully in, they will redeploy that. And as to the payroll tax, that is obviously one of the main sticking points. There are a lot of sort of interests aligned against that being included, outside of Congress. So we'll see where that lands. I don't know that I want to give you the over under on it, but I know a lot of people are not supportive of that. So maybe I'll leave it there for now.
Stay tuned. Yeah. Okay, and Kevin, related to this, as we continue to see record unemployment rates in California and other states, many workers are relying on the additional federal unemployment insurance granted in the CARES Act, but it is slated to expire at the end of this month. This is being hotly debated, as we've spoken about. So how do you see this playing out?
Well, it's, there's 2 schools of thought on this. The Republicans want to shave it in the Senate. They're talking about cutting it back maybe from $600 to $200 extra federally supported. Flip side, Senator Portman and others on the Republican side have for some months now argued that there should be a bonus for getting people rehired, kind of a version of the earned income tax credit where you actually get not exactly the same thing, but it's a return to work bonus, because there is this tension, obviously, in the service economy where if the unemployment benefits are higher, than what people would make going back. It's less of an incentive for people to take some service economy level positions that pay less because they can retain more, earnings and income by staying on unemployment. So I think it'll probably be some sliding scale and some combination of those two that comes in the final package.
For what it's worth, I think it'll be closer to the Senator Portman's framing of things. I think he's convincing a lot of people. So.
Okay, so we're just coming up to the top of the hour here, and I want to thank you so much to Dan Bernal, Anthony Campo, Kevin Kelly, and Leslie Katz, my friend, for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts and answering our questions. And thank you to all the attendees who joined us today and submitted questions as well. We will follow up with everyone in an email with a link to the recording of this webinar and links to other helpful resources as well. We will follow up on some of those questions that came in today. We hope to see you next Thursday for the next installment of the Council's webinar series. Have a great rest of your week and please stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.